Hey guys, welcome back to Falcons Central Radio, part of the Pro Football Central Radio Network. I'm one of your hosts, Aaron Freeman, joined by my co-host, Matt Carrolley. Today we're going to be talking all about this upcoming NFL draft. Finally, we are at draft week, and we are joined by cover1.net's and climbingthepocket.com's Jordan Reid. Jordan's going to talk with us about some of the latest rumors involving the draft, maybe, some of these smoke screens and where he sort of stands on them, as well as some of maybe his top prospects and top targets for the Falcons. Of course, later on the episode, Matt and I will sort of get into sort of some of the recent news involving the Falcons, sort of talk a little bit about the schedule, go through our very own 7-round mock draft for the Falcons, and of course, we'll do our best to get to your mailbag questions at the end of the show. But first and foremost, I do want to welcome Jordan to the show.
Thank you guys for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right, Jordan. Before we get to sort of talking about sort of these smoke screens and various rumors that have sort of reared their ugly head, maybe you could call it, over the last couple of days, I do want to ask you sort of what is maybe the biggest storyline, maybe the thing that you're most focused on going into Thursday night?
Well, of course, the quarterbacks, that's going to be the top story. And they seem to be all over the place outside of Kyler Murray. I think it's probably a consensus that he's going to be the top guy to go number one overall. But after that, we really don't know what's going to happen because there's so much coming out about Dwayne Haskins right now. I'm sure you guys have seen some of the rumors going on and just the weird story going around with his dad where he's being real defensive about Dwayne Haskins right now. So Cincinnati to 11, the Giants at 6, Miami at 13, or even the Redskins at 15. Nobody really knows where he's going to go right now. But outside the quarterbacks, I think it's by far this defensive line class. And I'm sure that's something we're going to get into here really soon. And I know you guys have you have your eye on a lot of these guys, especially for the Falcons. So where is Quentin Williams going to go, whether that's at 3 to the Jets or somewhere else? Does he last longer? Does he even go 4 to the Raiders? Ed Oliver has really been all over the place, but he's getting some top 5 steam right now ever since his pro day. And the whole jacket and sideline fiasco seems like it was years ago. So he seems to be surging up boards, but now you're getting into those second-tier guys like Dexter Lawrence or Christian Wilkins or even a Jerry Tillery. So I'm really interested to see what happens with interior guys, but also the edge rushers too. It's a very talented class, and I know you guys have your eye on Montez Sweat, a guy I really like as a fit there in Atlanta. Cleveland Farrell could be another option, or even a Rashawn Gary or Brian Burns. So I'm really interested to see exactly where all of these edge rushers land, specifically on the first day of the draft.
So, Jordan, as you know, this time of the year, a week or two before the draft, is appropriately called smokescreen season. So I thought we'd play this game called Smoke or Fire, like I like to call it, where we throw out some of these smokescreen rumors that have been out there this past week and kind of get your take on whether you think it's a smokescreen or you think there's some fire or truth behind it. So my first one, and we'll start at the top of the draft, Kyler Murray. Pete Prisco came out this past week and kind of said that the Cardinals might be backtracking on Kyler Murray at number 1 overall. You think that's a smokescreen, or do you think there might be some truth to that and they might go to Bosa at 1?
I think it's definitely smoke. And I actually got a chance to meet Pete down at the Senior Bowl. So he's a good friend of mine, but I think it's absolutely smoke. And the biggest reason I say that is because Cliff Kingsbury is only going to get one shot as an NFL head coach. And he's going to want his guy in there. And he has a previous relationship with Kyler Murray. He's operated in that offense before. And everybody has seen the clip where he says if he ever has the number 1 overall selection, Kyler Murray would be his selection. So I think that's definitely going to come true on Thursday.
Well, that's a bold take there, Jordan, just because I saw earlier today that the great Antonio Bryant, former wide receiver in the NFL, had basically had a source in the Cardinals organization saying Bosa's number 1 on their board. So, NFL insider Antonio Bryant says that they're going in another direction. So I think that's a pretty bold take for you to go and say that it's all smoke right there.
He started the Patrick Peterson to the Chiefs stuff too, man.
Yeah, well, the Chiefs made another move, so he just missed on the player. Who they wound up trading for with Flint Clark. But the next one I want to ask you is sort of you mentioned it before with Ed Oliver getting sort of the top 5 buzz. There's the recent rumors of sort of like the Jets have Ed Oliver really high and potentially could take him at pick number 3. There's also talk of the Raiders maybe taking him at pick number 4. Do you think there's smoke or fire there?
That's a really good question. I think it's smoke. I don't think Ed Oliver is going to go 3 to the Jets, but I think he may be in play for the Raiders at 4. But it's going to be really interesting to see who does end up getting Quinnen Williams there. And it seems like Josh Allen is slipping a little bit. Maybe he goes 5 to the Bucs or 6 to the Giants. I think that's a fair range for him. But it wouldn't surprise me if Ed Oliver does go top 5. But I think him going 3 to the Jets, I just think that's a huge smokescreen. And I think it would be a mistake if they do pass on Quinnen Williams for Ed Oliver, even though I think both guys are going to be terrific players.
Yeah, it just seems like they're trying to drum up some interest, in my opinion, for that trade up spot at 3. I mean,
yeah,
it's been long documented that the Jets kind of want to move out of there and perhaps get another second-round pick since they don't have any due to the trade up for Sam Darnold. So that's I agree with you. I think it's more smoke there, but I think too that the Raiders at 4 is probably where Falcons fans do have to get a little bit worried about Ed Oliver because Paul Guenther, which kind of just hit me last night, that Paul Guenther being Geno Atkins' former defensive coordinator, and that's one of the popular comps for Ed Oliver is Geno Atkins. So I think there it makes a lot of sense that maybe that's the surprise pick that's getting rumored for the Raiders at 4. You mentioned the quarterbacks, Jordan. Bengals and Redskins and a lot of teams in on Dwayne Haskins. I've heard recently Packers, I saw Justice Mosqueda talking a little bit about the Packers and Drew Lock connection. Where do you see some of these quarterbacks winding up? How many do you ultimately see going in the first round on Thursday?
I think it'll be 4, and I know a lot of people are trying to fit that 5th guy in there, but I just don't see that 5th guy and where they do fit, whether that's New England at the end of the draft or even the Chargers at 27. So I really don't see that 5th guy, whether that's Will Grier is a guy that a lot of people are trying to fit into the first round, but I just don't think he's a first-round worthy guy. And I think Daniel Jones will probably be the last one selected on the first round of the draft, but he's a guy I really don't know about either, just because there's a lot of interest being drummed up right now with him going 6th overall to the Giants. And I think that would just absolutely rock the draft, even though it's kind of expected at this point. I don't understand why they would take him that high. And I just think there's more talented guys in this draft than him. And that's not to say he's not going to be a good pro. I think he's going to be just fine. That's probably a lower tier starter in the league. I just wouldn't be comfortable with taking Daniel Jones in the top 10.
Now, there's a lot of talk about various teams trying to trade up, some recent rumors involving the Panthers and the Texans. Of course, Matt has been one of the front runners on the Falcons trading up for Ed Oliver over the last month or so. So the Falcons have certainly been, rumored for a while now that they're going to potentially trade up into the top 10 to get Ed Oliver. But I'm curious, sort of, are you seeing smoke or fire in terms of some of these other teams like the Panthers and Texans, as well as the Falcons trading up?
I actually think there's some fire to that. And I say that because, excuse me, I think the Texans are kind of going to be a little bit of SOL at that 23 spot because a lot of the top guys are really going to be gone at that spot. And you talk about Jonah Williams, Andre Dillard, Jawan Taylor, the list goes on and on of those guys that probably will be gone at that spot. And the Texans do have 2 second-round picks. They have the 53rd and the 54th selection, I believe. So they have the ammo if they want to trade up, let's say into the early teens, to get an Andre Dillard or even a Jonah Williams if he starts to slip into the teens. So I think they have the ammo to do it. And the Panthers are another team that definitely could trade up as well because they have a huge hole at left tackle right now. They don't know what they're going to do. They finally admitted their flaw in the whole Matt Khalil experiment. They cut bait with him. So they have a huge hole at that left tackle spot. Now, the Falcons are really in an interesting situation as well. I don't necessarily think that they need to trade up, but I think they're salivating over pairing Grady Jarrett with Ed Oliver, and that's a pairing that I have made very frequently. Now, I know both of those guys are a bit undersized, but if you think about the explosiveness that both of those guys bring to the table and the interior pocket push that they could present, I think it's a match made in heaven. Now, exactly where they will have to get in the top 10 to get him, I think that's kind of TBD to be determined.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up that last point about, how Oliver and Jarrett would fit, because that's one of the things that frustrated me the most, seeing some of the takes online about Ed Oliver during this pre-draft run-up, is that, because they're both undersized, it's not going to work. They're going to get pushed around in the trenches. But Ed Oliver, according to Pro Football Focus, was an elite run defender and graded, in the high 90s. And Grady Jarrett, same thing, graded out in the 90s last year in run defense. So there's no issues there. There should be no issues there. And again, it's a pass-happy league. So teams are 60, 70% in the nickel. Those two guys in the interior pushing the pocket, like you said, I mean, that's scary. To guard against, you got to guard against Drew Brees and Cam Newton in this
Absolutely.
division. Having those two guys there would be amazing. So, Jordan, my last one, sticking on the defensive line, Jeff Simmons, one of the most polarizing prospects in this class, both from an on-the-field standpoint, off-the-field standpoint with the ACL and some of the stuff that occurred before he enrolled at Mississippi State. There's been some links with the Eagles and the Colts near the back end of the first round. Do you think there's smoke or fire with that? And then just one follow-up, where do you ultimately see him landing? Do you think he can crack the first round on Thursday?
Oh, it's definitely fire. And if he doesn't get hurt, I think he's easily a top 10 selection in this draft. And he reminds you a lot of Fletcher Cox. And I know that might be a lazy comparison just because they both went to Mississippi State, but they're very reminiscent of each other. And he has a really good swim move that he likes to incorporate. And I think once he starts to progress his game a little bit further as far as a pass rusher, I think he's going to be unstoppable in the league. It's just a matter of if you're comfortable with his past. Everyone knows about the video and the thing that surfaced prior to his time at Mississippi State, but he's had a clean resume since that point, doesn't have any other stains, been a team captain. So he's been a model citizen since that point. It's just a matter of every team's not going to be comfortable with it just because domestic violence is a huge issue, and rightfully so, as it should be. And it's something highly debated throughout the league. We've seen similar occurrences of it happen the past few years. So every team just isn't going to be comfortable with taking him. But I think the Eagles are a great landing spot for him just because he's not going to be forced to play right away. They already have Fletcher Cox and Malik Jackson on the interior. So he's not going to be forced or rushed to play right away. And the Colts are another great fit as well. So I can see why there's a lot of steam for both of those teams. But as far as a player, I think he's going to be terrific. Now, it is a bit of a roll of the dice, and we've seen both sides of the spectrum. Some players have worked out that had that quote-unquote redshirt year, like a Sidney Jones or a Jalen Smith that have had that redshirt year and they didn't play their first year but came back and had success, while there's other players that really haven't worked out. So it's going to be a roll of the dice from an off-the-field and on-the-field standpoint, but I think a lot of teams are going to be willing to take the risk just because of the upside that he does possess.
Yeah, I think that's a good point with the redshirt year because you do have sort of a hit-miss ratio when it comes to these guys that often is the case where they have sort of these ACL injuries at the end of their college season that sort of derail the rookie NFL season. But I think the thing that goes in Simmons' favor, assuming a team is fine on the sort of the off-field stuff, as you discussed, is the fact that if you take him in the first round, you get a fifth-year option. So you basically can get, even if he does forced to sit out the season or a portion of the season, you can still get 4 years. If you wait till round 2 to take him, you're basically, if he winds up missing most of the season, you're really only going to get him for 3 years as opposed to a full 4. So I think that's part of the reason that's just incentivizing some teams towards the back end of the first round, like the Eagles, like the Colts, I think, that will wind up pulling trigger. I think someone's going to pull the trigger on him at some point in the last, 5 to 8 picks in the first round, but I just don't know who it is going to be.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that's exactly why I think he's going to land in round 1 is because of that fifth-year option.
So, Jordan, we got a couple more questions that, appreciate you for playing the Smoke or Fire game with us. And we'll see sort of what happens on Thursday night that proves some of these rumors to be true or completely false. But, next question, I do want to focus a little bit on the Falcons and talk a little bit about sort of if you were the GM of the Falcons looking at sort of their roster, looking at some of their needs right now, sort of who are some of the prospects that would sort of top your wish list of potential options if the Falcons were to stay at pick 14?
Yeah, and there's quite a few. And I think defensive line is probably the biggest need, but I think they still have some work to do on the offensive line, specifically guard and right tackle. I think they can get a bit better at both of those spots. And I know they signed James Carpenter and Jamon Brown, but I just think that shouldn't deter them from upgrading even further at that spot. And I think they can upgrade from Tyson Braylow as well. But edge rusher, I think that's an area of concern, especially with Vic Beasley seeming like a lost cause at this point. So Montez Sweat is one guy that I definitely have a star beside. And we've seen the Falcons in years past love to take these explosive athletes, even going back to Takk McKinley 2 years ago, Devondre Campbell even 3 years ago, and Deion Jones in 2016. So they love to take these explosive type of athletes no matter the position. And we've all seen Montez Sweat combine. And I know the heart condition is a huge issue, and we'll see where he does end up going. But if they're comfortable with his medical records, and every team is going to have a different opinion just because of the heart situation, and that's a very important deal just because of how important a body part it is and just the risk associated with it. But Montez Sweat is one guy that I would love to bring in, and I say that because I think he would be a fantastic pairing alongside Takk McKinley. But you really hope that bringing another guy in the first round in would motivate Vic Beasley to an extent, and you have that added competition with him to hopefully motivate him. So Montez Sweat is definitely one guy that I do have a star beside for the Falcons. Now, another one is Brian Burns, and I think he has more upside as far as a pass rusher than Montez Sweat. Now, he's not as well-rounded as a run defender, but I think his upside is probably greater as a pass rusher, but he's going to have some work to do as a run defender. So those are definitely two guys that I have a star beside at 14.
And Jordan, you mentioned the needs for the Falcons, and I think you hit the nail on the head with, defensive line and talking about the offensive line still needing some work. Would you agree that based on those needs, it makes more sense for the Falcons to attack the defensive line in round one, given that there is sort of a drop-off come round two and maybe even early parts of round three until you start picking back up, the depth of this class? Whereas, offensive line, it does seem like you can get some plug-and-play starters still in round two.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're spot on with that. And I would take my swing at it at this edge rushing class just because it is so top heavy. So let's say I get a Montez Sweat in the first round, and then I can come back and get a guy like a Chris Lidstrom in the second round. I think that's a home run first two rounds. So I definitely would take or target an edge rusher or an interior guy in the first round and then take my swing at a Chris Lidstrom or somebody of that nature, or even the Elton Jenkins or somebody like that along those lines in the second round.
Now, Jordan, I'm curious sort of to get your thoughts on maybe some of the guys that you look at that are overrated and underrated. Maybe some guys that you keep seeing mocked in the top 10 or top 15 that you're like, I don't even think this guy should be picked in the first round. Or maybe some guys that you continually see not mocked in the first round that you think are, some of the top talents in this draft class. So who are some guys that sort of, stand out to you as far as overrated and underrated go?
Yeah, I think Rashawn Gary is probably at the top of my list of a guy that I think is overrated, and he has all the ability in the world. I will give him that. His traits are off the chart, but a defensive lineman that just has a hot and cold motor so much really bothers me, and he really never took advantage of just the traits and the ability that he does have, and he's going to go in the first round. I still think he is, despite the shoulder concerns that is coming out about him. Some team is going to take the risk on him just because players that big aren't supposed to move that fast and have that much athleticism. So I could see him going in the top 20 range. I think that's a fair range for him. But as far as a guy that's underrated, he's really starting to blow up now, and I'm upset about it. His name is Darnell Savage from Maryland, and he's getting a lot of steam here lately. I got a chance to see him down at the Senior Bowl, and I fell in love with him since that point. And his leadership just glowed the entire week, and I was hoping that he stayed hidden, and he's actually a top 30 ranked player on my board. He's my second ranked safety behind Juan Thornhill, which were two guys that I got to see down at the Senior Bowl, and I thought both of them were terrific down there. So those are definitely my two guys that are really underrated, and all those guys, or both of those guys, can play any position in the secondary. And you're talking about a league that is so pass happy now. You have to have those guys in the back end that really can be interchangeable, and they can play any five positions on the back end of the defense. And I think either of those guys can do that.
Just one follow-up on Savage, because I'm a big fan of him as well. Can he play deep center as far as the free safety goes? I know he was kind of more around the line of scrimmage, playing more that hook zone coverage at Maryland. Do you think he can be a center fielding free safety, say in the Atlanta Falcons cover 3 scheme?
He can, just not consistently. I think just like the Falcons do, they rock and roll their coverage a lot, and I think he's able to do that. So if you're able to interchange him as that spin down safety, strong safety sometimes, and then allow him to be that free safety from time to time, I think he's able to do that just because whenever he sees what's going on in front of him, he immediately closes on it. And that's what I love about him. His closing speed is terrific, and he's a terrific finisher as well, as long as he keeps everything in front of him. Now, he's not a guy that's going to run sideline to sideline and be that Earl Thomas type of safety that does have that rangy speed on the back end. He's not that, but he can show glimpses of being that from time to time. Now, Juan Thornhill on the opposite end of the spectrum, he's your center field type of safety that can play sideline to sideline, and he tested off the charts. I love his story. 5-time state champion out of high school as well, so he's a proven winner. He has terrific ability. I mean, he jumped 43 inches or 44 inches at the combine, so he has that vertical aspect to his game, and he has the speed that you're looking for. So if you're looking for that typical center field type of safety that can sit on the roof of a defense, Juan Thornhill is your guy. But if you're looking for that interchangeable type of safety that can spin down and play strong safety, or from time to time play free safety, then Savage is your guy.
That's good stuff, Jordan. Thank you.
All right, Jordan, thanks. We appreciate you for joining tonight's episode to talk with us draft and get your eyes on some prospects. And, of course, you have a lot more insight on some of these prospects because I know you put out your draft guide over at cover1.net. Let the people know where they can find it, where they can find your stuff on Twitter and elsewhere online. And, of course, you're doing a good thing with this draft guide because it's not just necessarily money going into your pocket, but it's also going to a good cause. So explain that to the listeners as well.
Yeah, so you can find the draft guide at cover1.net. You can also find it on the top of my Twitter page is my pinned tweet, which is Reid NFL. That's at JREID NFL. So make sure you go check that out. Just to give you a bit of a description of where the proceeds are going, is going to a foundation called the Raleigh Rise Against Hunger Foundation, which is located in Raleigh, North Carolina. And this is a foundation that fights poverty, not only here in the United States, but also internationally. They have offices in Spain, Uruguay, Hungary, and a host of other places as well. So it's $10 for it, and your money goes to a great cause, but you're also helping yourself as well, just because you're getting to learn about these prospects. And there's a whole bunch of stuff included within it. And the biggest thing with me that I think my guy provides, as opposed to other ones, is that I like to talk about both sides of the player. And what I mean by that is everyone understands who these guys are with their helmets off, but I like to tell their stories and take the helmet off and just talk about their journey and how they got here. And that's something that a lot of NFL fans don't necessarily really understand about these guys. So that's something that I try to shed light on. And it's over 200 prospects, so make sure you go check that out. Again, that's at my Twitter page. It's pinned at the top. It's at JReid NFL. It is $10, and I highly recommend it.
I do too. I definitely recommend it.
Of approval.
Yeah. So appreciate it, Jordan. I'm looking forward to sort of following you on Twitter and seeing sort of your reactions to what the draft is going to unfold on Thursday night, and maybe getting your insights on sort of where the Falcons are going. And we'll be discussing that on next week's episode. But appreciate you for coming on tonight and talking draft and sharing your insights with us.
Appreciate it. Thank you guys for having me on, and I hope you enjoy the draft.
Yeah, thanks, Jordan. You too, man.
All right, guys. So appreciate Jordan. Again, go check out his draft guide at cover1.net. You, of course, can find the link to it, as he mentioned, on his Twitter page at JReidNFL. But now we're going to talk, switch gears and talk more Falcon-centric stuff with some of the recent news. Obviously, the NFL schedule came out last week. And so we sort of want to briefly touch on that. We're not going to do a full schedule breakdown. It's whatever at this point in time. But, this is a tough schedule. I think, in terms of strength of schedule, looking at last year's record, I think the Falcons have like the 8th hardest schedule in the league this year or something like that. It's in the top 10. I don't remember exactly where it ranks.
Yeah, I think you're
right. There's these two sort of stretches of games at the beginning of the season and midway through the season that seem to be tougher. And so basically, I just wanted to ask Matt in terms of his thoughts on what's the tougher stretch of games. The first 5 games where the Falcons face Minnesota on the road in the opener, then a Sunday night game at home at Philadelphia, then they go back on the road against the Colts, then they are home for the Titans, and then on the road again for the Texans. Or is it a tougher stretch that 5 straight divisional games that come after the bye starting week 10 at New Orleans, at Carolina, home for Tampa Bay. Then there's the short week on Thanksgiving night against the Saints at home, and then they finish at home against Carolina. So for you, Matt, which of these 5-game stretches do you feel like is going to be tougher for the Falcons to navigate?
I mean, I'll preface by saying I think they're both tough, but I'd probably lean the first 5 just because I think in Dan Quinn's 4-year tenure thus far, he's done pretty well against the division. So, again, I think they'd be able to navigate that and, go 3-2 maybe at the very least. For me, though, starting off with Minnesota and Philly, I think it's fitting just because of the fact that those are going to be the two most physical opponents on their schedule. And this whole offseason has been about getting more physical and getting more nasty up front. So to have those two be your first two, I mean, that's a real litmus test right there to see how far that they've come. And, if they could even split that series, you got to feel somewhat good about the progress they've made in the offseason. So, I mean, for me, though, that's got my attention. And the fact that, to follow, then you got to go on the road against an upstart Indianapolis Colts team that's probably going to be on a lot of analyst shortlist of a Super Bowl contender. Yeah, I don't think it gets much tougher than that. So, if the Falcons can get through there at 3-2, I think you got to feel pretty good about yourselves.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I feel like that divisional stretch is going to be very tough. And normally I would just play devil's advocate and make the case for it against it. But basically the argument I'll make is that if they don't come through that first 5-game stretch, well, it's not really going to matter what they do for that second 5-game stretch because, this is a type of season because coming off of these 5 games, they got games against the Rams and the Seahawks, and et cetera, going into the bye week. So it's one of those things where, if they don't get off to a good start this season, it's not really going to matter what they do in the second half of the season. All too much. So I would agree with you. Whether it's a harder stretch of games, that first 5 is probably a more important stretch of games. Is where I would argue. Yeah. The Falcons had some recent news since we last did a show last Tuesday. On Monday, Grady Jarrett signed his franchise tender. They also signed safety J.J. Wilcox to a 1-year deal. And last weekend, on Friday, they signed defensive tackle Rashid Hageman to a 1-year contract. Matt, what are your thoughts on these 3 most recent moves for the Falcons?
The Jarrett thing, I kind of took me by surprise because I thought it was kind of a formality already, but I guess it wasn't official until yesterday. I don't know if it means necessarily anything. I don't think a deal is any more imminent than it was prior to signing it. It seems like the reports out there are indicating that Julio Jones would likely get a contract extension done before him based on the reports. But yeah, again, I mean, Jarrett needed to be here. Now it's official. So at the very least, he'll be on that $15 million tag in 2019. As for some of the other signings, the Rashid Hageman, that took me aback on Saturday afternoon, seeing that. From a culture standpoint, I'm kind of at a loss for words why they think it's a good idea to bring him back. He lost their trust in the first place. It doesn't seem wise to bring him back. But I guess from a football standpoint, it doesn't hurt. He's going to be making vet min. Right now, he's no more than a camp body, but a camp body that has some experience that, again, will push some of the offensive linemen in practice. So I guess that's a positive. So I don't know. It doesn't mean anything for the draft plans. I still think, taking a defensive tackle in round 1 is still a very viable option. But yeah, a little head scratching, but, we'll see what happens with it. Again, having him, I think the thing that he's on suspension for 2 games too, it's like, why are you trying to put yourself through that when you don't necessarily have to, when he's a fringe roster guy? But again, I digress. We'll see what happens with it. As far as Wilcox goes, I mean, he was a guy that I was thinking would make some sense the offseason prior to be, a solid veteran backup for Keanu Neal. Now, I'm just confused why they don't want to accept Sherrod Niesman as the backup. Maybe they just want to keep pushing him. And again, Dan Quinn preaches iron sharpens iron. They're just trying to, get the best out of that bottom of the depth chart at safety, and Wilcox can certainly push Sherrod Niesman there, given that he has starter experience. So, again, these are more signings that create more flexibility, which is what the Falcons have done all offseason, and we'll see if it leads to anything in the draft with them, packaging some of their picks, knowing that they have some veterans to fall back on at certain spots on the roster.
Yeah, I think the thing that Wilcox brings is because of his experience playing in a lot of cover 2 schemes, like Indianapolis, like Pittsburgh, like Dallas to a certain extent. It does mean that the Falcons could try him at free safety a little bit more than sort of the traditional strong safety. So he does have maybe some positional versatility more so than a guy like Niesman, who I think is just a natural fit at that strong safety position. I think, the talk that earlier this offseason of sort of like maybe they could move him to free safety. I never really bought that because, in my opinion, I just feel like that's trying to put a square peg or an oval peg in a round hole, I guess, so to speak. With the Hageman thing, I don't necessarily have an issue with it. I sort of feel like, I don't know if deserves is the right word, but, I don't have a problem with him getting the opportunity to sort of redeem himself to a certain extent. And, I think he brings some versatility on the back end of the rotation if he does wind up making the team. Just because we've seen him play 3 different roles in this defensive scheme, and sort of right now, too many of the back end players are sort of kind of square pegged for one spot, and having a guy that has some versatility, I think, makes some sense. As for Grady Jarrett signing the franchise tender, the only thing that sort of surprised me that it came this early is now means he can't skip mandatory workouts anymore. So he's got to start showing up for some of these off-season activities at some point this off-season, just because he's now technically under contract. So I was a little surprised to see him sign the tender before training camp, because personally, maybe it's just a lazy person in me, but I just wouldn't, want to be obliged to have to show up to various off-season activities, before I'm personally ready to do so. So
one question I wanted to get your opinion on. I kind of threw this out facetiously on Twitter, but by bringing Hageman back with his pass and everything, do you think this gives any sort of indication that Falcons would be okay with a guy like Jeff Simmons? Say were the Falcons maybe to trade up back into the back half of the first round, or say he were to miraculously fall to 45. Do you think this tips their hand at all that they'd be comfortable with the off-field stuff with him?
I can't imagine they wouldn't be. It would be kind of weird for them to be like, we're good on Rashid Hageman, we're not good on Jeff Simmons. Right. And that was something that you and I discussed earlier this offseason, where, like, me personally, because again, I don't know anything. I'm just a guy sitting in a chair giving opinions about players. I don't know the details really to sort of feel strongly one way or the other when it comes to Jeff Simmons. Personally, from what I know of his situation dating back to when he was in high school, I'm good with him. Similar to sort of what Jordan said, he's been a pretty good citizen for the last 3 years. So I don't feel like, you're getting a bad character guy from that sense. But, it didn't seem like, given sort of the situation with Hageman, given Jalen Collins, given guys like Prince Shimbo, some of the quote-unquote characteristics that the Falcons had taken in the last couple of drafts didn't necessarily work out in their favor. And from my perspective, that meant that the team was probably unlikely to sort of, favor Jeff Simmons on the draft board. But now, sort of in light of this Hageman move, I guess that assessment was probably wrong, I would say. Would you agree?
Yeah, no, I think it would be pretty hypocritical if they bring Hageman back but say no to Simmons because of the same thing.
Yeah, and if we're being honest, what Hageman did is probably, well,
let's not go down that.
Yeah. So we'll end that segment without controversy, and move on to sort of selecting a mock draft for the Falcons. We're gonna try to do this using FanSpeak. I know, the Draft Network has sort of taken over the mock draft simulators, but, we're going with FanSpeak today, and we're going to use the CBS Sports aggregate board just because I think that's a little bit better at sort of predicting, more accurately predicting sort of how high guys are going to go. And we'll sort of use the FanSpeak based team needs. For those of you, I'm sure most of you guys watching the show are very familiar with these sort of mock draft simulators that websites like FanSpeak and the Draft Network have out there. So not a whole lot of explanation, but basically what Matt and I are going to do is we're going to wind up picking sort of not who we think the Falcons will draft, but more sort of come to a consensus on if we're co-GMs in this instance, sort of who we would take with these various selections for the Falcons. And we'll try to go through all 7 rounds and all 9 picks. I'm sure, those last couple of round picks, it's going to be Matt and I really scrapping it out over, these 5th and 6th round talents. So let's jump right in and get this thing started. we got our producer Brian on the keyboard handling this, so there will be a slight lag on sort of us controlling this thing. But as you can see, Kyler Murray went number 1, Quinnen Williams 2, Jonah Williams 3, Josh Allen 4. Nick Bosa finally went number 7. Ed Oliver went 10. Devin White went 11. Noah Fant 12. Drew Lock 13. So we're looking at this board and sort of the top overall players available right now: Jawan Taylor, Rashawn Gary, T.J. Hawkinson, Devin Bush. The offensive tackles: Andre Dillard, Cody Ford.
So where did Burns go?
Where did Burns go?
Oh, wow.
He went 5. Okay.
Yeah.
So,
So there goes the edge group, in my opinion.
Yeah. I like Cleveland Farrell, but I don't.
Same. Yeah,
I don't like him enough to take him over, I think, what are overall better offensive tackles.
Right. Yeah, I would look at the offensive tackles.
So who on that list sort of stands out to you? Jawan Taylor's more sort of the consensus guy. There's talk of some undisclosed.
I know you like Jawan more than I do. Cody Ford is my second overall tackle on my board. So I'd be probably going with him. But again, I can get talked into a couple of those options at tackle.
Well, look, for me, I like Jawan Taylor more than Cody Ford. I think he's, better, I guess is the simplest way of saying it. But given sort of these nebulous rumors about sort of medical issues that we don't know the exact details of, I've heard rumors that's sort of a heart thing. I haven't heard any confirmation about that, so I'm not necessarily putting too much stock in that. But given the fact that there's sort of this cloud hanging over Jawan Taylor, and I feel like Cody Ford is only a slight drop off from him, I'm willing to go with Cody Ford. Plus, I also sort of think Cody Ford is probably my choice to be the Falcons' number 1 pick.
Yeah.
So it jives.
Going back to our smoke or fire thing that we did with Jordan, do you think the reports about Cody Ford being viewed as a guard by the Falcons, do you think there's any smokescreen aspect of that, or do you legitimately think that they view him as a guard?
I don't know, man.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like I think they like him. I think maybe they see him more as a long-term option at one of the guard spots, maybe playing that left guard spot with James Carpenter being pushed out the door eventually. So maybe that's where I see it. But I can't imagine them drafting Cody Ford, who I think is a really strong candidate to be their number 1 pick, and then sort of not having him compete at that right tackle position with Ty Sambrailo.
Yeah.
So maybe they're like, we'll put him at tackle early and then we'll eventually move him to guard.
Well, I threw this out there that Jamon Brown was a tackle in college, dabbled with it with the Rams before getting hurt. Maybe Brown versus Sambrailo. I don't know did Dan Quinn legitimately come out and say that Brown's going to be a guard for the Falcons to start?
Every time I've heard him talk about Jamon Brown, he's talked about him as a guard.
Oh, okay.
But I don't know if there's any sort of specific soundbite where he's basically said, our right guard Jamon Brown. But any questions that have been surrounding them, they've always referred to those guys as guard. And I haven't heard him, as he often does, talk about a guy's sort of positional versatility, like he usually does when he does talk about some of these players that have it. So I haven't heard that, but maybe I just missed it.
Okay. Well, I guess we're going to lock in Cody Ford then.
Yes, Cody Ford is the pick for us at 14th overall.
Lock it in.
All right, we got the sound effects there too in the background.
If only our producer could actually click the button. Okay, there we go.
All right.
Ooh, DeAndre Baker went 15. I don't see that happening.
Nope.
Dwayne Haskins goes 20 to the Steelers. Wow. Okay. This draft is already wonky.
So much for CBS Sports being the best one, huh?
I thought so. Well, Fan Speaks needs must have threw it off. Why are the Steelers picking a quarterback?
Yeah, especially since I guess there's a report out there that they're trying to extend Ben Roethlisberger pretty soon.
Yeah, that's weird. But yeah, hey, weird stuff happens in the draft all the time. So it's not as if,
Yeah.
Whoever the Steelers were probably going to take was probably not somebody the Falcons were probably going to take anyway. So
right.
So Yeah, we're looking at the first round. Devin Bush falling all the way to 27. I think he's going to be a top 10 pick. There's Jeffrey Simmons going to the Packers at the back end of the round.
Yeah,
Caleb
that's
McGarris.
actually my prediction for where I think a dark horse he can go. Is I think the fact that, again, that's another spot where he doesn't have to play right away. They got Mike Daniels, they got Kenny Clark. They've been trying to bolster that defensive line. So whether they're comfortable with the off-field stuff, Green Bay doesn't typically tread those waters, but I do think there is a spot for him.
Yeah, and Mike Daniels is entering a contract year, and it sounds like they're not inclined to re-sign him.
Right.
So
right.
we will probably be talking about him as a potential Falcons free agent pickup next year.
Brian is highlighting Ed Oliver just to kind of rub it in my face that he's, I think, the 10th overall pick and not the Falcons pick. Cool, Brian.
Let's move on to the second round. All right, the second round should be pretty interesting.
Yeah. I'm already not necessarily happy with how it's gone so far.
You really wanted that edge rusher in round one,
yeah, because the drop off is, Chase Winovich already went, didn't he? So the drop off's insane for some D line help.
I'm looking at Zach Allen still there.
You're on the clock.
Eric McCoy is very interesting. That's not going to help you out a lot this year, but like 5 years from now, you're going to be like, that was the best pick in this draft.
And Alex Mack, this could be his last year, so it's a luxury pick, but it's one that could pay off, like you said. What's the D line again? Zach Allen, you said, is the top one available?
Yeah, you got Zach Allen, you got L.J. Collier, Terrell Willis, Joe Jackson, Charles Omenihu. Who's the edge rushers? Could you check out some of those edge rushers for us, Brian? Ja'Kai Polite. What do you think about Ja'Kai Polite?
Yeah, we talked about this the other day. I think, again, you got your right tackle situation, I think, solidified with Cody Ford. At this point, you don't have a lot of starter spots open, so you can take a chance. And Ja'Kai Polite has round one tape. It's a risk because, what he did in the pre-draft runoff, you couldn't have done it any worse than him. He basically flunked the exam. But again, I trust the decision makers. They're the ones talking with these guys. If they pulled the trigger on Ja'Kai Polite at 45, I could understand it. Because again, we were talking about him a month or so ago at that 14 spot. So I can certainly sign up for that because, again, at this spot, he's the most talented edge player. I don't care what those rankings say. Tape-wise, he's the most talented.
Go ahead.
Well, the only thing I was going to add is, we were looking at Zach Allen. I don't know where you stand on Zach Allen as far as positional versatility, whether you think of him as a strong side defensive end and then you slide him in nickel. Falcons got a few of those guys already. They're not long for the team. They probably got 1 or 2 years left in Jack Crawford, and Adrian Claiborne. I think you can get a guy like that later in the rounds, 3 or 4. I'm leaning towards Ja'Kai. So what do you think?
Yeah, I like Zach Allen. I don't really like him at 45. I feel like that's kind of a reach.
Yeah.
For what I think he's going to be at the next level.
Mm-hmm.
I like Ja'Kai Polite. I'm not necessarily scared off. Again, it's similar to sort of the Jeffrey Simmons things as sort of a guy sitting on his couch making these $1 million decisions. My job isn't on the line, so I don't have a problem looking at Ja'Kai Polite. But I'm sort of sitting here thinking, like, would I rather take the risk on Ja'Kai Polite, or would I rather have a guy like Eric McCoy, who I know is going to be a good player, who I know is going to be a fixture here and potentially could start day one or challenge, probably not start, but challenge for a starting guard spot right away and be that sort of long-term center option. I feel like I know, if it's up to me, I'm probably leaning Eric McCoy, even though there isn't sort of that clear-cut need. I just think that's a pure best player available. And while it may not pay off immediately this year, again, as I say, 5 years from now when he's making Pro Bowls, I feel like you're not going to be complaining about it.
Yeah, no, I'm cool with that because, again, I think, too, this defensive line class goes deeper, especially when you get 3, 4, 5. I think you can get a guy like maybe a Shane Jimenez might be there with that third-round pick. So, yeah, let's lock in Eric McCoy.
Lock
All
it
right.
in.
There you go, Eric McCoy, second-round pick. We did what Jordan said. The Falcons could continue to address their offensive line with multiple picks early. Let's see if did Ja'Kai already go?
I missed it. I was too busy playing with that draft soundboard.
Maybe.
Did he?
He might still be there for us.
I mean, he's ranked 104. Oh, there's a Shane. Wow. So much for that round 3 hope. There's Joe Jackson, another one kind of hoping round 3. He is still there, which I think, honestly, how I feel like it's going to go for him. We've seen the Tim Williams comparisons. Tim Williams went in round 3, very similar story as far as had the tape, but the off-field stuff, the pre-draft stuff didn't work out in his favor. He ended up going round 3, so I think that's where kind of teams are going to start looking at him is round 3.
On the clock, Atlanta Falcons.
Can we look at the edge rushers so we can see if Ja'Kai's still there to confirm?
Well, that worked out. I love it when a plan comes together.
Do you want to look at any otother options?
We can, but
I mean, is there another position that's on sort of?
He doesn't like Ja'Kai.
No, I want to do our due diligence.
What other D linemen are there?
That we can sort of plan ahead to what we want to do next round, maybe. What's
your take on Charles Omenihu?
I like him. When people start talking about him being as like a first round talent, I'm like, okay, let's.
No, I mean, this is the spot I'd take him.
Yeah, if he went, like, he's one of those guys in sort of the late 2, early 3 sort of range for me.
Yeah.
Similar to Zach Allen, but I probably like him a little bit more than Zach Allen just because I like his tools a little bit more.
Yeah. But again, I'm seeing Renell Wren, and I think that's a guy that can play kind of a similar role to Charles Omenihu, where you can put him at strong side defensive end.
Darnell Savage.
And slide inside in the nickel. So, again, I think there's more options D-line that you can get a similar skill set to Omenihu. I don't think you can get the burst off the edge anymore like you can with a Ja'Kai Polite. So I would go Polite at this spot.
Let's go Polite.
Yeah.
I'm good on that. I just wanted to plan ahead and maybe that we can sort of target a guy in round 4 that we might be able to land.
Lock it in, Ja'Kai Polite.
Lock it in.
I'm not sure some of these names that we're seeing are going to last this long, but we'll see.
Yeah.
Like Savage, I think is definitely a top 50 pick.
Yep.
I think Isabella's going to go in round 2. I don't think Ryan Finley's going in round 3. I'm not buying that smoke.
Oh, I heard Ryan Finley might be the 5th quarterback taken.
Oh, God. They do this every year. Every year they try to push up a Tom Savage or Davis Webb to be like in the back end of the first round, and it never happens, and yet they keep doing it. I think Will Greer is going to be QB5.
I like Will Greer, I think, almost more than I like Daniel Jones.
I don't sit here. I'm not going to fight you on that.
Yeah.
All right, let's go on to round 4. We got 2 picks in round 4 now, Brian, just to give you a heads up. One at the, spot, whatever, and then one at the back end. So, all right. So, what positions are you sort of hoping to get at this point in the draft? I do feel like we need to get cornerback depth.
Yeah, I got that on my mind. I was hoping Kalen Saunders was going to fall a little bit. He just got picked a couple spots. For the sake of it, let's see what D-line are still available, Brian. Dalen Mack. I do like Dalen Mack. Oh, man. Tristan Hill's 182.
Yeah, okay.
That's my boy.
It's not a perfect ranking system, clearly.
Yeah, no, I think there's talks of him going to Dallas at pick 58.
Yeah. Kingsley Keke being 234 is crazy.
Oh, that's another, yeah. Wow. We're going to get I feel like let's just load up on all these D linemen the next several picks. Let's take advantage.
We could just wait till round 6 and just to take the best D lineman because we're going to be getting some third round guys in round 6.
Because of that, yeah, let's look at cornerback. Jamel Dean, I didn't do a lot of scouting on him, but guy tested very well. He's got the height, weight, speed.
I like Jimmy Moreland a lot. Of these guys that I've actually watched,
yeah,
I've watched Corey Valentine. I've watched Jimmy Moreland. I feel like those two guys are really good, solid depth pieces.
Yep. Whichever one you like, I'm good with either or. I think positionally though, Corey Ballantyne probably does have some outside capabilities.
Yeah.
Moreland doesn't.
Yeah,
although I did think a little bit that maybe Moreland can turn into like this year's Avonte Maddox, who showed the ability to play outside for Philadelphia. So, maybe I'm, writing them off too soon there, but I think that's kind of where I would slot those guys if they were drafted by the Falcons. Ballantyne could play some outside and inside, but Moreland's probably strictly a slot corner.
Well, if it's up to me, I would probably like to get Ballantyne with one of these 4th round picks, and then probably come back in round 5 and get Moreland. Does that sound like a plan to you?
Love it.
Check out the tight ends. I know Matt likes a certain tight end. I love
it. There he is, staring at me in the face.
I mean, do you want to take Moreau and hope that Ballantyne's going to be there at the end of this round?
Well, what other corner? What's our? Let's go back to corner for a sec, Brian. I mean, is Moreland just the fallback plan, I guess, right?
Yeah, I mean, if Ballantyne goes before our next 4th round pick, then I feel like we can.
Mark Fields is there. Jordan Miller's there. Both of those guys I like a lot. Jordan Miller, I think, is a guy, developmentally could be a very low-key good NFL player on the outside. And that's a guy we can get maybe later in the draft if Ballantyne ends up getting selected. Yeah, I mean, if you want to bring me my son Foster.
Yeah, I know this will make you very happy if we get
because
Foster.
it's not gonna happen this weekend, so might as well let it happen right now. All right, let's lock in Foster Moreau.
Lock it
in. And now I feel like it's a quid pro quo where I've given you the tight end, and hopefully we can get the wide receiver I want later in this draft.
I see what you're doing.
Yeah.
There's a method to your madness. I should.
Oh, that DeMarcus Lodge. I'm ironing that DeMarcus Lodge very.
You're on the clock.
There he is. All right, let him have it.
Wait, no, we don't need to take him now.
You think
is Ballantyne still on the board? I'm curious. He is. I think Ballantyne's going to be the next corner going. We do have another pick, like in 20 spots.
All right. If you're willing to take a chance for your guy, let's lock in Corey Ballantyne.
Let's do Ballantyne. Cornerback Corey Ballantyne.
Lock it in.
All right. Here we go. All right. Interesting round 4.
Yeah, some guys I think are going to go much earlier.
Some guys I think are going to go much later than round 4 that picked in round 4 in this.
Yeah.
Let's see if DeMarcus makes it.
Yeah, let's look at those wide receivers. Ooh, getting close. Close.
Come on. Oh, please don't do this to me. We're on the clock?
On the clock, DeMarcus Lodge.
Okay, let's do it. Can we do it?
Let's lock it in. DeMarcus Lodge, the Mohamed Sanu replacement in 2020.
Close.
Do you like him on the outside, or do you think he's more just a slot guy?
I like him more on the outside. Really? I like putting him there, and then maybe we'll put Ridley in the slot in the future, and just let Ridley cook.
Yeah.
On the clock.
All right, so we got cornerback, we got wide receiver, we got tight end, got edge. Let's look at. We probably have to go D-line, interior D-line. Let's see what. He's still there.
Tristan Hill, you want to take him?
Yeah, let's lock that in. Tristan Hill is one of my guys in this class. I think
I don't love Tristan Hill, but if in some weird universe where he falls to pick round 5, I'm all over it.
I mean, he's definitely got some deficiencies. He plays like a chicken with his head cut off at times, but he's got the traits.
Yeah.
And I got to believe with Dan Quinn taking more of a hands-on approach with his defense.
Yeah, he's a high upside guy. I don't love his floor. I think his floor is a little low for me to take him as high as some people want to do. But definitely in terms of upside.
Yeah.
So.
All right, so we got
on the clock, the Atlanta Falcons.
Looks like Jimmy Moreland's already gone. What other positions do we want to?
I mean, there were some other cornerbacks there still, like Mark Fields and is Mark Fields still there? Mark Fields is there.
Okay.
I think Mark Fields could be a dynamo slot guy. Again, kind of similar to Jimmy Moreland. Kind of, he's got junkyard dog in him. But I
want to look at the linebacker.
Yeah, that's another one. That's another one. Wow,
Tacky's my guy.
He's still wow. That's one that he was getting some third round buzz, wasn't he? Third, fourth round?
Again, CBS. I thought the top of their draft board was really good, but maybe not as we get deeper into the draft
deeper rounds. Yeah, there's a lot of good options there. I mean, Khalil Hodge is someone that Raekwon and I wrote about on our piece.
Okay, so how do you want to plan to attack this? Because we got this is our second pick in round 5. We're in round 6, so we got 2 picks left.
Oh, this is 6. Yeah, we got 2 picks left.
So who? I mean, both. I think both Fields and Tacky are going to last to that round 7 pick.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking at Ben Burkevin too. Tell me about him. I mean, I think he's a Dan Quinn type linebacker.
I actually haven't watched him.
Okay.
I didn't pay too much attention to him because he didn't show up at the All-Star games, to be honest with you.
Yeah. And Tacky and what's the other one we're looking at? Is that the guy we're eyeballing? What about Jelani Tavai? I think again that's another sleeper that I think was invited to the Senior Bowl but had to bow out due to injury. But another underrated linebacker that again. I don't know if you can go wrong with some of these names on this list. If we want to hold out, I mean, what other position would you be looking at? Going back to corner, get a slot corner, and then. Yeah,
you want to take Fields here, and then sort of whoever is left at the linebacker. Yeah. Since we don't clearly, I like Tacky, but I'm not going to sit necessarily, fight you on it.
Right. You think as far as linebacker versus safety goes. Come this weekend, you think it's more likely they go linebacker than safety, right?
I would imagine so. I feel like between Niesman and now Wilcox and Cooper and Laguda, what are you really looking for at safety at this point in time? Like a special teams guy?
Well, okay. the only thing I'm thinking, and that's kind of why I threw the question out to Jordan earlier about Savage's ability, is if there is one zigzag move that maybe they make, it's a center field free safety because maybe they're not comfortable long term with Ricardo Allen's health and all that. But yeah, I think they're probably going to punt on that for one more year, more than likely.
Yeah, I mean, look, they have shown interest in Nasir Adderley. One of the Falcons' assistant coaches did recruit him to Delaware. So, I don't see that as sort of a first round pick, but I guess now that you put it out like that, it would shock me, but it wouldn't totally shock me if they took someone like a Nasir Adderley at pick 45.
It's like the Calvin Ridley pick. I mean, we thought that they were going to take a wide receiver. We probably didn't think they would take one that early, but it made sense the more you think about it. So, again, Achilles injuries, they're tough, and it looks like the rehab's going well based on some of the videos, but you never know. So
yeah, and you're right. If they sort of see. I'm like, DeMonte Casey as a long-term nickel cornerback,
right?
Then, it would make sense to sort of get your long-term free safety. But all that being said, let's get cornerback Mark Fields.
Yeah, let's lock in Mark Fields,
and we'll see what linebackers there for us in round 7. Burkevin just went.
Yeah.
I just haven't done as much due diligence on this linebacker class as I probably should have.
Yeah.
But some of the guys I've watched that they've worked out I have liked as sort of day 3 types of guys.
There's Tavai, so the linebackers are starting to go a bit. Cam Smith.
Okay. Daniel Wise lasting all the way to round 6. I guess that is possible.
Yeah, they played him so out of position at Kansas that I feel like they did him a disservice where not enough tape at his probably best position, that 3 tech.
All right. Final pick in the draft. I hope this is a compelling video for, or audio for the people that aren't necessarily watching this right now. So I apologize in advance if that's been an issue. Sort of us just standing here watching the mock draft board tick by. So Brian, can we check out the linebacker group?
So he's there.
Tacky.
Yeah, let's lock it in. Although
right.
I do like Ulysses Gilbert. I think he's very reminiscent of Foyolokun, and apparently they have some interest in him. So I wouldn't be shocked if they went to that uber athletic, as they like, linebacker, and take a guy, to maybe push Duke Riley. But yeah, let's go tacky. There's some connection.
I like Tacky's ability to play some strong side linebacker spot.
Yeah, that is much needed.
His rush, his ability to rush the quarterback. I feel like he's sort of a very similar player to Devondre Campbell, who we all sort of expect at this point in time is not likely to stay on the Falcons beyond this season.
Yeah, it's going to be tough. So yeah, it started off slow, but I do like how it kind of finished, and I think this draft class is top heavy, and then the second and third rounds don't necessarily align with the Falcons' needs, but once you get to rounds 4, 5, and 6 even, I think really where the Falcons could get some real gems. So I think in this case we kind of did that. I mean, I don't expect Tristan Hill definitely not to be on the board by round 5 come this weekend, but there's definitely going to be other guys that can be contributors for the future.
I feel like everybody we took after round 3 in the real draft later this week is going to be a 3rd or 4th round pick.
Yeah.
So I don't know how realistic this 9-player haul is going to be. But
really, I think Tristan Hill is the one that stands out to me. Do you think DeMarcus Lodge is a 4th rounder? Because again, this receiver class is deep as far as rounds 2 and 3, and I think that's when they're going to start to go. And DeMarcus Lodge is more in that next tier that isn't getting talked about enough. Where
you're probably right. Lodge will probably slide a little bit. I feel like most years he would go as a 4th rounder, but I do think you're right. The depth of this draft class will probably, and he hasn't really had a great offseason to really sort of, running fast 40s and doing various other things that really sort of stand out from a sort of clustered group in the middle rounds.
And you could probably even switch it where, we maybe took Foster Morrow a little earlier than maybe he even goes, and you can flip-flop Lodge and Morrow. And again, the only one that really jumps out at me is not going to happen is Tristan Hill at round 5.
So Brian's right now showing some of the other teams around the divisions draft. Tampa Bay getting Brian Burns in this mock.
I hope not.
Jerry Tillery,
that is
Anthony Nelson. They certainly, with those 3 picks, definitely upgraded their front in the Todd Bowles era. I don't really love Nelson's fit in the 3-4.
No.
But in round 4, you'll figure it out.
He's another one that he tested really well, but kind of like a Jordan Willis from a couple years ago, where I didn't expect that. You don't necessarily see that on his tape.
Ooh, this Broncos mock is, I think, similar to how the Falcons mock could go in some universe. Ed Oliver, Rock Ya-Sin, and Titus Howard.
Injected in my veins right now. Let's just change the names.
Josh Oliver. I don't know how high you are on Josh Oliver, but
he's all right. I mean, he's probably what they hope Eric Saubert turns into, like a flex, kind of a big wide receiver that can play tight end. But as far as blocking goes, I don't know if you want him doing that too much.
Carolina definitely addressed
Carolina.
their offensive line with Taylor
Yeah.
and Michael Jordan getting some size. They got some big guys. Michael Jordan should be a tackle. He's a interior guy in the tackle's body.
I like that Sheldrick Redwine pick. I wouldn't be disappointed if the Falcons got him, but again, we just talked about it. They have a dearth of safeties now on their roster, so I doubt that they address that.
New Orleans got Jimmy Moreland, Khalil Hodge,
Ugh.
Deontay Johnson, who is sort
Hunter,
of
oh man, Hunter Renfrow, 100 yards or 100 catches per season in his future for sure.
One position seeing Deontay Johnson's name on here. One position we didn't address that I do think the Falcons will wind up addressing with their wide receiver pick is a guy that has return skills, and a guy like Deontay Johnson is definitely on their radar.
Yeah,
so,
he met with them. So, yeah, that's one to watch out for. He's very underrated.
Andy Isabella is another guy that has return skills. I don't think he's going to be in the range where the Falcons are looking at wide receivers. But, interesting. He is going to the Seahawks in this mock draft that we just ran in round 3. So,
nice to see that they updated that to include the new first-round pick that they have gotten from the Chiefs. That, I don't know about you, but that's a head-scratching move by the Chiefs to trade Dee Ford. He ends up getting less money by $20 million total, and then you end up parting ways with your first-round pick just to pay a pass rusher. That's probably marginally better and maybe a little bit better fit for that 4-3, but to part ways for a first-round pick and $20 extra million for a small upgrade at defensive end pass rusher doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But
I think the argument the Chiefs would make is that it's not a marginal upgrade, and I do think I kind of agree with them. I do think Frank Clark is much better than Dee Ford, even though maybe some of the sack numbers may suggest otherwise. So
I know
I get it. I agree with what you're saying. It's the upgrade is not significant enough to
in terms of pressures this past year, Dee Ford I think led all edge defenders, or he was 1 or 2. He was in the top 3. I know that for sure. So he had a great season. We'll see if it was just because it was a contract year or he's going to continually do that. And I think with the pieces in place in San Francisco and adding a guy like Bosa on the opposite of him, I think he's going to continue to do that. But I don't know. I just think you can't say it's any more than, 5 or so spots of a pass rush ranking that you're improving. But
fair enough. Frank Clark's other issues withstanding, if I could just basically, all things being equal, which they're not in this case, I would probably much rather prefer to have Frank Clark on my roster than Dee Ford. But
I don't think I'm disagreeing. I'm just saying I don't know how much.
I agree with you. It's not enough to deal with all the other things surrounding sort of the move with paying more money and sort of the value getting back, trading your first round pick. Would you rather have Dee Ford at $85 million in your first round pick, or Frank Clark at $105 million in a higher third round pick or something like that? So yeah, I get it. I agree with you on that part. All right, so there you have it, guys, with our little mock draft. Do we have enough time to get to a mailbag question?
Yeah, let's do it. This is the last show before the draft, so might as well.
Let's see. I did not put these in order of priority. Okay, let's just go with the first one. Stephen Bounds asks, do you think there's any chance the Falcons would draft a left tackle with the idea of moving Matthews to right tackle at some point? I know that's not likely, but maybe Matthews wants to be like that and play everywhere, every position on the O-line.
Yeah, in a perfect world, if you can just mess around and stuff and see how well he can do at center and guard, I mean, that would be cool. But I think now that Matthews has established himself as a Pro Bowl left tackle, if it's not broke, don't fix it. So I think there's 0% chance of that happening, and they're looking at that right side to improve there rather than shift Matthews over.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I would say no to your question, but I do think there is a reality where you could justify it. But I just don't think that's this reality, because I don't think there's a left tackle in this draft that is better than Jake Matthews. I like Jonah Williams. He's my number 1 rated offensive tackle, but I think he's kind of like a middle class man's Jake Matthews. I don't think he's as good as Jake Matthews was coming out of Texas A&M. So I don't feel like there's a player that you would add that would bump Jake Matthews to another position. Although I do think if, Jake Matthews was to move to another position, I do think center is a position he could probably play really well. He did, snap a little bit during his days at Texas A&M. And so if there was a world where there was another sort of elite left tackle prospect that the Falcons could get at pick 14, or at least a comparable left tackle prospect as Jake Matthews, there is a world where they could draft that guy and, I don't know, in the future where Alex Mack retires or whatever, and the Falcons are like, hey, Jake Matthews, you want to be our center of the future for the next, 11 years like your dad wasn't with the Oilers and Titans? Yeah, there's a reality where that happens, but I don't think we're living in that reality.
Yeah.
We kind of already answered David Von Wilson's Ja'Kai Polite question. So we'll answer his next question, which is, how do y'all feel about a 6'4" Jalen Hurd and Miles Boykin? Could the Falcons get them?
I haven't really watched Boykin. I've seen, differing opinions on him. On one end, there's a guy that could be a Julio Jones type player, but lacks the consistency to be a Julio Jones. I mean, he has the measurables and the testing for it, just lacks the consistency. So, if we're talking round 4 or 5 and the Falcons do want to address, wide receiver to replace Sanu long term, Miles Boykin would be that type of prospect, to, boom or bust, but you're taking a chance on the traits. And Jalen Hurts very similar. I mean, hasn't played the position long, was a former running back at Tennessee, and then, went to Baylor and transitioned to wide receiver. And he's got some film that he knows what he's doing out there as far as, running routes, crisp routes. So he's a guy, again, that I've, had my eye on in the later rounds on day 3. That would be a fun pet project for year 1 to learn from Mohamed Sanu and then take over for him in 2020. So I'd be cool with them. It just, depending on the range that you're going to take those guys, I wouldn't pull the trigger probably any sooner than really round 5.
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I do think if and when the Falcons draft a wide receiver, it's going to be a guy that has return skills. So guys like a Mecole Hardman, guys like a Penny Hart, guys like a Deontay Johnson are going to be more of the guys sort of that are on their radar, as opposed to some of these other guys that are true, offensive developmental talents. I haven't watched a ton of either Hurd or Boykin. I've seen a little bit of both of those guys. Sort of my opinions of those guys are sort of echoing what Matt just said. I do feel like they're talented players. They have a lot of upside, but I don't think they're as polished as other guys that you would look for earlier in the draft. So I do feel like that late 3rd, early 4th round range is ideal for either one of those guys. But again, I think, while I wouldn't necessarily be like, oh, the Falcons shouldn't draft those guys, I would sit here and think that I think it's very unlikely that the Falcons are going to target, sort of those types of receivers, as I mentioned, because I think they're going to be looking primarily at somebody who has skills in the return game. Noel Rodriguez, Volta Noel 2020 asks, what do you see us making more likely, trading up or down? If we stay put, are you okay with taking a boneless wing? Answer to that last question is
that's
no,
for you. That's for
yeah.
you. I think they're going to stay put. I want them to trade up, as people know that followed me for a while. I don't know. I just, as the Falcons often do, I mean, you expect one thing and, you end up getting disappointed because they do the exact opposite. So I think that's more likely they're going to stay put. My gut's telling me they're going to take an offensive lineman, which is fine. Protect the franchise player, Matt Ryan, and move on, and that's cool. But as we've said on this show, even earlier today and on other shows in the past, I think it really makes a lot of sense to get a defensive lineman in round 1 because there is a drop-off when you get to rounds 2 and 3. And this draft is deeper, at least when it comes to round 2 for offensive linemen. So that's where I would go if it was me. And, if you want to ensure you get one of the blue chip prospects like an Ed Oliver or a Brian Burns or even a Montez Sweat, I think you're going to have to probably trade up. Now, Montez Sweat might fall into their lap due to the medical issue. And, who knows whether the Falcons will pass him on that. if last year is any indication with the Maurice Hurst situation, which is very similar, it seems like they might not pass Montez Sweat for the medicals. So we'll have to see. But, again, if you want to get one of those premier defensive linemen, you're going to have to move up for him. I don't think staying put at 14, you should take a Cleveland Farrell or a Christian Wilkins. At that point, I'd hope they would trade back if they wanted to go D-line. But Thomas is usually more aggressive when it comes to the first round, and I'd be shocked if they traded down from the first round. But, I'd be all for that too. Accumulate some picks because, again, this draft, the depth of this draft is in the later rounds, in my opinion. But for me, I think they're going to stay put.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the most realistic option for trading down, maybe a team like Houston at 23 or a team like Oakland at 24, if one of those teams wants to get aggressive and move up and potentially get an offensive lineman, or in the case of Oakland, assuming they get a guy like Quentin Williams with their first pick, maybe they're going to try to move up and get one of those edge rushers. So I think it's possible, but I agree with you. I think more likely you'll see the Falcons move up than move back. I think, jumping into the top 10, I feel like that's been a long shot for a while. The more likely scenario is the Falcons see whoever they want there at pick 11 or pick 12. And knowing a team like Miami, you could go D-line or offensive line at pick 13. A team like Green Bay could be a sort of secret D-line, and there have been rumors that they also like some of the offensive linemen at 12. Cincinnati, if they don't take a quarterback, they could, go in a variety of ways as well, linebacker being one of the top needs, but could take a best player available on the offensive line, defensive line as well. So I could see the Falcons maybe jumping up 3 spots to get their guy, whoever that guy is. I think right now, like Matt, I feel like, the safest bet for who the Falcons will wind up with is Oklahoma offensive tackle Cody Ford, but there's plenty of other options that we've discussed on the show that they could. Call it my pessimism or whatever, but I have this weird feeling that Brian Burns and Montez Sweat are going to be there at pick 14, and then the Falcons will still take an offensive tackle because the Falcons always seem to be like, oh, they're going to take this guy because they're picking here. And then they wind up, that's when they sort of do that zigzag thing that we constantly talk about. So it's going to be I don't know. It's going to be an interesting evening on Thursday night. So we'll have to see how it plays out. But Definitely not a boneless wing. Definitely not. Bone-in only. All right. Last mailbag question comes from fans since 1988. Seeing what edge players make on their second contract now, the Falcons almost have to take an edge at 14, right?
Yeah, I mean, as I said in the last question, that's what I would do, not just from the money standpoint, which does make a lot of sense. And that's something I think you brought up several shows ago, is that, based on what these guys make on the open market, it makes more sense to draft your edge rushers and pay the interior guys. Just, there's about $5 to $7 million difference. But, I think just from what I was saying about how the board looks to me, you can get a plug-and-play right tackle, I think, in round 2. You can get a Caleb McGarry. You can get a Titus Howard. I think those guys should both be there at 45 that you can insert in the lineup, and they would be an upgrade over Tyson Braylow. You can get those at 45. It doesn't seem like you're going to be able to get a Chase Winovich at 45, and depending on how they view Ja'Kai Polite, maybe he's off their board entirely. So at that point, you're not looking at any guys that you can feel pretty good about in the present or even in the long term necessarily as being, upgrades over Vic Beasley. So yeah, that's why, I'd want to pull the trigger in round 1. Hopefully Burns or Sweat are available to them and they make that move and they continue the trend of every other year taking an edge rusher. But, as Aaron said, I agree with him. I think it seems like they're going to go offensive line.
Look, this question, we're reaching a point where you can probably put any position in this question, not just edge players, based off of some of the contracts we've seen this offseason, like linebacker and safety and corner and wide receiver, So, Nate Solder made $16 million a year, and Nate Solder was bad in New England for those last 3 years there. So it's one of those things where it's like we're reaching a point sort of coming up on the end of this current collective bargaining agreement and the start of the new one in a couple of years, where we're just going to have to recalibrate sort of what we think players can and should make in the NFL, because I think we're going to see a big jump in the next couple of years that I think we're already starting to see in the last couple of off seasons. So this is kind of a situation where you're right. I think, given the extreme prices that even, good edges, but not necessarily guys that I'm like, that's a franchise edge. That's a guy that, that's a Von Miller, that's a Khalil Mack, the type of guy that you build your defense around, are getting paid, like DeMarcus Lawrence and Clark and D Ford, good players. We saw this with Olivier Vernon a couple of off seasons ago. Good players, top 10, top 15 edges, but not necessarily franchise cornerstone type of players are getting paid these huge money. And, you sit there and you're just like, yeah, let's just get the guy that makes $2 million a year in the first round and sort of then we'll have him for 4 years and then we'll pay him, which is kind of what we're hoping to see with Takk McKinley in the next couple of years. But, yeah, it's going to be an interesting next couple of off seasons because I think this is you're going to be asking this exact same question about another position next year, where you're going to be like, given how much these guys make on these second contract, shouldn't it make sense for the Falcons to take a linebacker at pick 27 or whatever the position is? So yeah, we'll see how it plays out. Well, guys, we appreciate you for tuning in tonight, checking this out. And we'll give you our takes on Thursday night live on Twitter. We talked a little bit about putting together a live show. Maybe we'll decide. We'll talk a little bit after
maybe.
this. Yeah, we might decide to put something together. So we'll keep you guys updated on that for a live show on Thursday night potentially. But you want to keep up to date with that by following either Matt or myself. On Twitter, I'm at FalcFans. Matt is at Matt Caroly. That's Karoly. You can also check out Pro Football Central's Twitter handle, PF Central, or the show's Twitter handle, Falcons PFC, as well as get updates. Make sure you subscribe to Pro Football Central on YouTube. Hit that bell icon when you subscribe so you get updates when we go live. Check us out on Periscope. Check us out at ProFootballCentral.com. Check us out on Facebook at Falcons Central Radio. So you will definitely be hearing from us this weekend, perhaps on another live show. So we'll discuss that after this and sort of hammer out the details if we're going to do that. So, there you have it, guys. And we'll talk to you soon.